She prays in the courtroom, eyes wide open, lips moving in silent desperation, as if heaven, angels, God, any savior at all could rescue her from what's coming. Her lawyers had built what seemed like the perfect defense: a war refugee drowning in trauma, a child who fled bombings and family separation. She was just acting out, they claimed, too young to understand what she'd done. The defense was working, the judge was listening. But then the prosecution presented the autopsy photos, the confession recordings, and the timeline proved she'd been alone with her grandmother for hours, and everything changed. What you're about to see is the moment Sofia Koval's childhood trauma defense collided with the brutal reality of what she did to her 80-year-old grandmother. The moment she understood that fleeing Ukraine couldn't erase what she did in that Lauderdale Lakes apartment. This is the chilling case of the teenage immigrant who beat her elderly grandmother to death. And every single detail I'm about to show you has been verified through court records, police reports, and sworn testimony. If you've never heard this story before, prepare yourself, because what happened in Florida on May 23, 2024 will challenge everything you think you know about generational trauma, adolescent rage, and how a confiscated phone can trigger deadly violence. There was something investigators discovered about Sofia's behavior immediately after the killing, something that contradicted everything her defense would later claim about her mental state. Around just past midnight, on the 23rd of May 2024, Vladimir Koval walked into his apartment off NW 41st Street in Lauderdale Lakes. He'd been visiting a friend his mother was supposed to be watching his daughter. Instead, he walked into a crime scene. Vladimir's mother, Yevgenia Koval, lay motionless on the living room floor. Blood pooled around her gray hair. Her face was riddled with bruises. There were bits and pieces of her walker littered across the room. A leather belt lay twisted beside her body, the metal buckle smeared red. Sitting in the room next to his mother's corpse was Vladimir's daughter, 14-year-old Sofia.
No, she was in the bedroom.
In the bedroom?
Our bedroom. Screaming.
Like yelling, or what was?
Something blubbering, some like a little crying, kind of like, but not like, not really yelling.
Okay, so not loud, just kind of making...
Just making noise, make it cry.
And
I see grandma I couldn't recognize, so I asked Sophia, come here with what happened.
you said she was laying same way we found her?
Same as you found it.
She was laying face up on the ground.
Vladimir's mind couldn't process it. 3 generations had lived in this apartment peacefully. His mother had survived World War II. She'd fled to America for safety. Now she was dead on the floor. He asked Sofia what happened. Her answer came fast and cold. Grandma attacked me. I defended myself. Keep this detail in mind. It becomes critical. Later, Sofia didn't wail. She didn't seem to panic, but worst of all, she didn't even try to help her dying grandmother. Vladimir called 911 at 12:26 a.m. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They rushed Yevgenia to the Broward Health Medical Center. There, she was pronounced dead on arrival. Under Florida law, Sofia was immediately Baker Acted, taken to a mental health facility for emergency evaluation. But after 72 hours of observation, deputies arrested her for murder. Officers noted something disturbing in their reports. Sofia showed no emotion during the arrest, no tears, no resistance. She just looked distant, like she was watching everything happen to someone else. One deputy wrote, "Subject appeared blank, almost disconnected from reality." The autopsy results came back within days. Blunt force trauma to the skull, deep bruising across both arms. Ligature marks on the neck are consistent with strangulation. The medical examiner identified the murder weapons, a leather belt with a heavy buckle, and Yevgenia's own walker, the same walker she needed to move around her home. The injuries were extensive. They showed a sustained attack, not a momentary struggle. Yevgenia had tried to protect herself. Her arms were covered in defensive wounds. This wasn't self-defense, this was rage. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline. Vladimir told them he'd confiscated Sofia's phone that morning as punishment. She'd been glued to the screen for weeks, ignoring chores, yelling at anyone who interrupted her. He left Sofia alone with Yevgenia around 8 p.m. to visit a friend for a few hours. When he returned just after midnight, his mother was dead. Investigators had a 4-hour window. No witnesses, no security cameras inside the apartment, just Sofia's confession and the physical evidence. They ruled out burglary immediately. Nothing was stolen, no forced entry. The apartment was locked from the inside. Sofia admitted to the killing, but her story began changing almost immediately. First, she told detectives her grandmother scratched her, forcing her to fight back in self-defense. Then her story shifted. She claimed Yevgenia was dying already from old age and illness. Sofia said she simply helped her. Let those words sink in for a moment. An 80-year-old cancer survivor who'd escaped war was helped to die by her own granddaughter. But there was one more piece prosecutors would use to demolish Sofia's defense. Something about her demeanor that didn't match someone who'd just lost control in self-defense. During the 3-hour interrogation, Sofia never asked about her grandmother, never asked if Yevgenia survived, never showed remorse. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the darkness that had been building in this family for generations. Yevgenia Koval was born in 1944 in Nazi-occupied France. She was an infant when Allied forces liberated Paris. After the war, her family returned to Soviet-controlled Ukraine. She grew up under Stalin's regime, survived the Cold War, built a career as a teacher, educating children through decades of hardship. Then came the cancer diagnosis. She fought it while still working, still caring for her students. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Yevgenia thought the worst was behind her. She immigrated to the United States in her 70s to live with her son Vladimir and finally know peace. She was wrong. Her granddaughter, Sofia Koval, was born in Ukraine in 2010. For her first 12 years, life was relatively stable. She had both parents home, school, normal childhood rhythms. Then Russia invaded in February 2022. The bombs started falling. Air raid sirens became routine. Sofia and her mother fled westward while Vladimir stayed behind to help evacuate others. The family reunited briefly in Poland later that year. But Sofia's mother couldn't get a US visa. She had to stay in England, while Vladimir and Sofia immigrated to Florida. Sofia arrived in Lauderdale Lakes in 2023. She moved into her grandmother's apartment, 2 generations of war survivors under one roof. At first, the change seemed to help no more sirens, no more hiding in basements. America offered safety and stability, but within months, cracks appeared. Sofia enrolled in middle school, but struggled with English. The cultural differences overwhelmed her. She had no friends. Teachers described her as withdrawn and distant. At home, tensions grew. Vladimir worked long hours to support them. Yevgenia spent the most time with Sofia, and Sofia began to resent her. Yevgenia would ask Sofia to do stuff around the house. The troubled teen would refuse, tempers would flare, and angry words would be said, and almost as soon as it had begun, it would be over again. To Yevgenia, this was discipline, the same way she'd raised Vladimir, firm but with loving boundaries. To Sofia, it felt like control, like another war she couldn't escape, and there was one time she actually had a small episode.
When I was have an argument with her.
You have an argument with Sofia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, this is
the most recent one. Okay.
Recently, before that, and she basically holding for the office chair role, and she fell on her hip.
Oh, it was like one of these chairs rolled out from her?
Oh. She lost the balance, she fell on her hip, and she had it cracked.
But what nobody knew yet was how deep Sofia's anger had grown, how isolated she felt, how the separation from her mother was destroying her mentally. At school, the bullying intensified. Sofia stopped turning in assignments. Her grades collapsed. She stopped talking to classmates entirely. The family hoped it was a phase, but they couldn't afford therapy. Immigrant wages barely covered rent and food. Sofia grew quieter, more withdrawn. The only time she showed emotion was when someone tried to take her phone. That phone was her lifeline. Her connection to her mother in Europe, her escape from a life she never chose. And on May 23, 2024, her father took it away. Then, investigators found something that changed everything. Vladimir had confiscated Sofia's phone that morning before leaving for his friend's house. Sofia was furious. She'd already been fighting with Yevgenia for weeks. The tension was constant. Sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight, the argument escalated. According to the medical examiner's report, Sofia grabbed a belt first. She swung it at Yevgenia's head. Yevgenia tried to defend herself. The bruises on her arms proved she raised them to protect her face, but Sofia didn't stop. She picked up her grandmother's walker and struck her with it. When Yevgenia fell, Sofia used the belt. The strangulation marks told the story Yevgenia fought for several minutes before losing consciousness. Sofia then sat down and waited for her father to come home. 4 hours. She sat in that apartment with her dying grandmother on the floor. She just waited. When Vladimir walked in after midnight, Sofia was calm, almost serene. That detail became the prosecution's most powerful weapon. By September 2024, Sofia Koval was in court facing first-degree murder charges. The prosecution wanted her tried as an adult. If convicted, she'd face life in prison. The courtroom was packed. Media outlets covered every hearing. The case divided the community. Some saw a troubled child who needed help. Others saw a cold-blooded killer who beat her own grandmother to death. The defense filed a motion to transfer the case to juvenile court. Their argument was straightforward. Sofia was only 14. Her brain was still developing trauma from war, and separation had damaged her ability to process emotions. Psychologists testified for the defense. Sofia showed signs of severe depression, post-traumatic stress from the Russian invasion, anxiety from family separation. She lacked the mental capacity to fully understand her actions. The defense painted her as a victim, a child pushed beyond her breaking point. But the state had one more expert who would demolish that claim. That's when the prosecution revealed their psychiatric evaluation. A court-appointed psychologist had examined Sofia independently. His conclusion? Sofia understood exactly what she'd done. She knew hitting her grandmother was wrong. She knew the belt and walker would cause serious injury. She knew not calling 911 meant Yevgenia would die. And here's the evidence that proved it. Sofia changed her story multiple times to avoid responsibility. First, she claimed self-defense. Then she claimed mercy killing. Each version was calculated to minimize her guilt. That's not mental illness. That's consciousness of guilt. The prosecution laid out the timeline: 4 hours alone with her dying grandmother. No attempt to help, no remorse when questioned, no emotion at all. The evidence versus the explanation couldn't be more different. The defense claimed Sofia was a traumatized child who snapped. The confession tapes showed someone who sat calmly beside her grandmother's body for hours. Remember that detail about Sofia's blank expression? The prosecution used it to prove she wasn't in a dissociative state. She was fully aware, she just didn't care. The judge reviewed testimony for 3 weeks. Expert witnesses on both sides presented conflicting evaluations. The defense showed Sofia's trauma history. The prosecution showed her calculated responses to the police. The courtroom waited for the decision. Finally, the judge ruled. Sofia Koval's case would be transferred to juvenile court. She would not be tried as an adult. The defense had won. But here's what the defense didn't expect. The conditions of that victory: Sofia received juvenile sanctions, mandatory psychiatric treatment, intensive counseling, detention until she turned 18, possibly longer. The judge imposed strict requirements. Sofia would remain in a juvenile detention facility for a minimum of 3 years. She could not be released unless court-appointed psychologists deemed her safe for society. And if she violated any condition of her detention, if her behavior showed she wasn't improving, prosecutors could petition to try her as an adult retroactively.
Your attorneys have negotiated on your behalf that you would be adjudicated guilty of this charge, then you would be sentenced to juvenile sanctions, where you would be committed to a maximum risk program, followed by a conditional release not to terminate without a hearing. For how long? You have to have terms and conditions.
Till the age of 21.
And that would be in place until you turn 21. Do you understand that?
The mercy she'd been granted came with a deadline. Fail to rehabilitate, and an adult prison awaits.
Ms. Koval, do you understand that? That you could be in this program for up to 3 years until juvenile justice determines that you have satisfied their requirements.
Yes, sir.
One more condition sealed her fate. Sofia would be monitored for 3 years after release. Any violent behavior, any failure to comply with treatment, and she'd face adult sentencing for murder. Vladimir Koval appeared in court during sentencing. He read a brief statement. He'd lost his mother. He hoped his daughter would use this chance to understand what she'd done.
We lost our relationship, and here today to testify that I hope that the judgment will give a chance to my daughter to assess, realize our mistake, and correct our future life.
He left the courtroom without looking at Sofia. Sofia Koval is currently detained in a Florida juvenile facility. Her release date depends entirely on psychiatric evaluations, confirming she no longer poses a danger. The case remains under state supervision. If Sofia fails to meet rehabilitation standards, prosecutors can refile murder charges in adult court. The belt marks on Yevgenia Koval's neck remain the central evidence in the case file. The autopsy photos, the confession recordings, all of it waits in case Sofia's juvenile sentence fails. The question of whether a 14-year-old refugee deserves a second chance or adult consequences continues to divide Florida's legal community and the Lauderdale Lakes neighborhood where Yevgenia died.